Hi, and welcome to the TrueWorks podcast, the podcast that equips you to see how the gospel can transform your life and your work. I am your happy host, Joshua Smith, and this is my co-host, Doug Meikle.
Yep, co-host, but not as happy as Joshua, because who could be?
Yeah, I'm glad we're seeing each other
seeing the true you.
And learning one another so well. Today, we are talking about a lesser-known piece by the great Jonathan Edwards, Love, the Sum of All Virtue.
Yeah.
And like in all of our other episodes, we're not going to go line by line or anything like that through this piece, but use it as a launching pad, a touch point, an inspiration to the themes that he draws out in this in this older piece. It's not ancient because he was around in the mid-18th century. I've heard several times the greatest theologian that the America has ever seen.
Yeah, the greatest American theologian.
Probably, that's probably still accurate to this day.
Yeah.
He was also a great philosopher. He was quite acquainted with modern philosophy like the 16th century onward, and integrated it into his theology. His kind of name to fame kind of in wider culture is a little regrettable because it really doesn't, well, how could one piece really capture someone as profound as Edwards? But especially in this instance, his name to fame is Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God.
Yeah, the famous sermon.
Yeah. And I had to read that sermon in my high school. It was
part of American literature. Something
exactly.
Or other. Yeah.
Yes, precisely. Sophomore year or something like that. And I wasn't a believer when I was reading it back in high school. And wow, it's pretty hard to swallow. Yeah. I mean, like this guy is not messing around with the evil of sin and the justice of God. Sinners dangling over the cliff of hell, waiting to be dropped into the inferno.
Like the spider at the end.
Yeah, like the spider, yes. And he's drawing on a tradition that reaches back to Dante. But in the piece that we are using as inspiration for our talk today has quite a different theme. Love. Love as not simply action, but as kind of the base of all of our moral flourishing and moral actions, that it's not something, compassion and love is not something kind of addition, but is the animating force from which all other true virtues come.
Yeah. So for example, I mean, to put it in the context of the faith and work intensive, so for Edwards, one would say, like for example, for Edwards, love is the basis of the way that you supervise people. Love is the way that it characterizes the way that you give someone an employee review. Love is the way that you satisfy customers. Love is the central organizing kind of principle from which you interact with each other and with the world in general. So love for him is the sum and the foundation of all virtue. All good things that we do come from love.
Now, so there are at least two claims that he's making here that I want to zero in on that great example of applying it to our professional or work life. Because first, the claim is that there's only one thing that is animating these. You gave some examples. What would be, say, an alternative interpretation of what could animate supervising, what could animate satisfying your customers? What are some other things? I mean, this is not a trick question.
No, I mean, but one could, and I think commonly folks might think that the role of the supervisor might be simply direction, might be simply to organize and get the maximum efficiency. And so those could be elements of work. But for Edwards, you do that on the basis of love for your employees, and he doesn't use employees. Obviously, he's talking about a generalized principle. I'm trying to get it into a form that folks can kind of consume and use in their daily life. So it's not like organizing my workforce well or organizing my team well would be something that he would not recognize. Of course, he would recognize that, but I do that right at the core because I love and care for them. I want to give them meaningful work. I want to allow them to do great work in the world. That's the core motivating principle, is my love for them and my love for their well-being. Yeah.
What could be so love as opposed to efficiency, as opposed to
control?
Okay.
As opposed to power.
Okay.
How many people manage to well, I think of my own motivations. I often tell the story that Karen had just given birth to our first child, but no, it was third child. It was I just joined a different company, and I was going through the training courses and stuff, and I suddenly realized, I tell this story a lot when I talk about kind of leadership or management. I realized, wait, I could run this whole business. I'm just smart enough. I just thought of myself as good enough. I could do that whole thing. But when I look back and try to analyze why did I think that, it's because I wanted the juice, I wanted the power, I wanted the ability to kind of shape and control people. And over a period of time, and I think by the time I came to, maybe 10 or 15 years later, I was running another business, both in a different country, and then when I came back to America, I had kind of realized by that point that it was almost, I'd completely changed my way of thinking about that, that these were the people that God had given me to serve. So I'd gone from these are the people that I am there to control to these are the people that I'm there to serve, and that is my duty to them. That is my kind of calling. Those were my church, if you like, my people, the ones that I prayed for, the ones that I tried to take care of, create a safe environment from I was an industrial company, so safety was a big deal. So create a safe environment was very important value to me, not compromising on that, So that was a change over a period of time that I think that someone like Edwards would recognize, that there is a way of approaching the world where I can be about myself, or for true flourishing, for the true way to do work is from the basis of love, love for your fellow human being and and his or her circumstances.
So you've given, you have many more years of professional experience, and you've given a really good sense of bringing it down to our everyday life. Thanks for sharing those.
Yeah, these are not so. And I think the other thing about Edwards. So Edwards was a very gifted man, obviously. Gifted in his time. He was the president of Princeton University. Was it? Maybe even his founding president. Is that right? Or is that wrong by that? He definitely was president. And he's buried in Princeton graveyard as well.
Yeah, I don't think founding. Yeah. But certainly he was certainly the president.
Yeah. So he was president of Princeton back in its earliest days.
Yeah.
So he was a profoundly smart guy. Also, when you read his works, he was also an amateur everything. Like he would just, when he was wandering around.
He was an amateur naturalist.
Naturalist, was just captivated by the beauty of plants and flowers and things like this, and really, truly captivated by them, wondered at them.
Yes.
So he was this kind of deeply smart yet observant guy. But in this stuff, he just would really recognize that love is the sum of our virtues, that should be our kind of principal relationship to the world. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's look at another aspect that is a surprising claim in just the title. Not only is, as Doug, you've beautifully illustrated, how this should be the motivating factor instead of these other motivations, but it says love is the sum of all virtues. So even these, let's consider some virtues: truthfulness, courage, loyalty, integrity, self-control, all of these things. What Edwards is saying is that this is not some buffet smorgasbord that you need to pick up these traits in order to become a better person, or in Edward's context, it's becoming more like Christ. It's you first start on love, and love is always what you begin with and what you come back to, and you will, in effect, become more truthful, courageous, self-control. And this is coming right from the scriptures. And what we didn't mention about this particular article, I think, if I remember correctly, this is was a sermon that he wrote a manuscript for, word for word, because he knew that it was going to be published. It wasn't published until after his death, I think, but that we have word for word. And so he's talking to his parishioners, attempting to show them a vision of the good life. And he said, it's much more simple than you might think, because there's this one animating thing, love. And I'm reminded of when Jesus is talking about worry and things that we are to pursue. Seek first the kingdom of God and all these other things. Seek first love, and these other virtues will come on. Now, we don't live in a context where people are like all the time worried about their virtues and where they're growing in each of these way, where their his context.
But we live in a context where people are worried.
They are certainly worried. It's the human condition of being outside of the garden, being worried and anxious, because we're not in control.
No,
and we know that there's something wrong.
No, but Edwards, another element of Edwards that there's some, I guess some folks would be aware of this as well. So he was around during times of great revival, Christian revival, also where
the Great Awakenings.
The Great Awakenings, he wrote one book, that is Faithful Narrative of a Surprising Work of God, which was his observations of this time of this sweeping kind of power of God that manifested itself in these kind of weird and wonderful ways all across both his congregation and others in New England at the time. And again, this is also something where I think folks perceive of a Puritan, and that's how he's characterized oftentimes, Edwards as this great Puritan, as these kind of austere people. And in some respects they were, of course. But also there's another element where these kind of miraculous and surprising work of God is almost like a euphemism for completely crazy things that I cannot understand, that I'm just writing down because that's the only thing I can do with them. I can't process them. I can just simply tell you what God did. And, so there's elements, so I think, to Edwards that I think are not, he's a very multi-dimensional person. And perhaps another surprising thing is just how multidimensional he is, because oftentimes folks just have the caricature in mind.
Another piece that is associated with the love sum of all virtue is the affections one. What is the title? Do you remember?
Oh, shoot, no, I can't remember that.
Karen enjoys it, I know, especially as well.
If you give me a time, I'll probably think of that by the end of the podcast.
Okay, good. But just emphasizing that he was austere in some way, but also deeply human, in that he noticed and wanted the gospel to transform the entire person, which included the affections. And affections doesn't just mean emotions, something that you can't control. So
so he's using that word there in the sense of all elements of our life and personality, how we interact with the world. That was the affections were almost like our posture towards the world, the totality of our posture towards the world.
So let's talk about what he thinks love is. Throughout history, there have been given various flavors and facets of love. Doesn't seem like any of them are completely wrong. What are some on offer when you think of what we think of as love today, and then what Edwards would say what he did say in the piece, but also how we can draw it out to understand what love truly is in the picture of the gospel and the scriptures.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one thing that you could say, I think that love today is generally perceived as romantic love. And the sense that love can be an ongoing commitment that one has to work at, one has to build, that is not something that just this kind of flash in the pan thing that just happens in a moment, but something that can be worked on and built through life, is very much the contrast, you know, from love being this thing that's right at the center and core of your being, an orientation towards the world, if you like, to love just being something that one can consume almost in a moment, or one can lay aside in another moment. I think for him, love is also this kind of this long-term, ongoing commitment. Yeah, it produces fruits. Actually, that book is it Charity and Its Fruits? No, is that a different one?
I don't know that one.
Yeah, so that's also a book that he writes. It's a series of sermons he writes on the gifts of the Holy Spirit, charity and its fruits.
Yeah, but fruits, I mean, this is important and extremely biblical.
Yeah.
Because you know, I think you're right that romance really, whether we know it or not, this kind of romantic, dare we say, sentimental sometimes. Aspect, understanding of love really colors and guides our understanding of what we think it is, and of course the biblical the way things really are, it doesn't deny that. But what Edwards is trying to get to is what is the core, and when you bring up fruits of love, we see this all the way back in the garden, which is what is the fruit of Adam knowing Eve, right? It is to participate in the procreation, you know, the filling of the earth, and that it continues in Adam knowing Eve and continuing in a relationship. And Paul fleshes this out as a beautiful picture of what Christ is to his church.
Yeah. Well, but there again, there's, and this is hopefully motivating you guys to pick this up and read it, and that there again, love and relationship, whether it's Christ and his church, or even the kind of the ongoing kind of relationship that's fundamental to the Trinity, that giving and knowing of each other, I think his point is that that's kind of what's being revealed to us there is how the world truly works when it's at its best. When it is as God intended it, that's what's at its core. Now, our experience of the world may not be that. Our experience of the world may be something rather different, but that's not God's intent. God's intent is for love to be at the center of the world and the center of our experience of it. And once it is, then we have that. Then that's how we're flourishing. That is how we flourish. We flourish by bringing that right to the center. And when that's at the center, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that can move to the periphery. And so that's what Edwards is driving towards there. And if you think about how love is portrayed, another one might be Hosier. You guys can go type that into Google or something like that. He's a Irish guy who my daughter likes. Hope likes him, and he writes often singer, okay. Singer songwriter, and he there's a couple of songs. I think Someone Like You maybe is one of the songs where it's the search for love ultimately in its modern form ultimately ends in kind of no love and alienation. And I think that's, again, the contrast between this love as it's portrayed here as something that's at the core of who we are and builds relationships that last on into eternity, and love as it's often placed in front of us as something that is fleeting and ultimately unfulfilling and left behind, and the cause of great isolation and loneliness.
There's at least two ways that you can respond to what this artist,
Hosier,
Hozier,
Hozier,
okay, finds in his music, and that's testified to maybe in some currents in our sociological context of that we pursue this romance, and yet it is fleeting. One way is to we'll always have a new romance, right?
Yeah.
So just pursue, to always have the fire burning by having new irons in the fire, so to speak.
Yeah.
That's pretty exhausting. Or you can just be kind of cynical. That's all sentimental garbage, and so we shouldn't be concerned about it at all. And the Christian vision is to say, well, neither of those are wrong, but you've put romance in the center instead of, as you said, on the periphery, instead of this other kind of, sometimes said to agape or sacrificial or continued work at love, pursuing our Redeemer as he has pursued us. I think, as I was thinking about this piece, I thought that perhaps our modern context actually understands, the American church understands perhaps better than the people that Edwards was talking to, that love is at the center of Christianity. But different than Edwards' context, they may have understood better than we do that from this love comes acts of obedience. That almost seems like, because our central idea of love is kind of the spontaneous romance, that there's not going to be kind of any type of application of that love or rule or obedience from which follows that.
Yeah.
That's something maybe they understood better than we do currently.
Well, love is implicit in love, as he talks about it, as an obligation. Love is not simply an emotion; it's an obligation that goes on through time, and consequently, how does one love one's children when they're young? You love them by feeding them, taking care of them, changing their diapers, doing all those things. That is love in action. In fact, that's the very nature of love. It doesn't only remain an emotion. It flows through us into how we interact with the world. And again, for him, you have to recognize that when you read someone like Edwards, when he talks about love being the sum of all virtues also are those things by which we interact with the world. It is the means by which we interact with our fellow human beings and the communities in which we live, etc. They're not these static properties. They live in our actions. So again, it's hard for us to look back from the way that love is often presented to us today as simply an emotion, an affectation of the mind, perhaps, or an orientation of the mind. Whereas for this, and this is true for all the way back through into the biblical times as well, is that love is something that lives in its actions.
Lives in its actions. No, that's good. Thank you for sharing that. When we look at he also has this thing toward the end of the piece where he talks about that if we have not love in the way that he goes through the piece and describes it, then other things just fall by the wayside. Other things just don't matter. It's of central importance that it gives the importance, the sub-importance to those other areas of life.
Yeah.
Like only when this type of gospel transformation love is at the center of our other activities, do those other activities take their proper importance. Again, we see a line or a stream of Augustinian that he is inspired by. Edwards was a student of Augustine. That it's not that we love, it's that our loves are disordered.
Absolutely.
And we can only love, I can only love my wife properly when I love her as a creature.
Yeah.
That is not as my God. That is not as satisfying every type of longing and affection. My wife is wonderful. She's a gift from God, but she is not God.
Yeah.
There's only one God, and he came as Jesus Christ. And when we keep that the center, then we can enjoy the wine. We can enjoy our position at work. Or maybe if we can't enjoy it yet because it's so difficult, we have the hope that is available to us to endure until either that circumstance changes or that Christ comes again. All circumstances change. And we'll talk more about hope in the text Surprised by Hope by N.T. Wright. But the foundation of what creates hope is this coming of love and then the gifting of love.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I think so. Challenge for you guys as readers and participants in the Faith and Work Intensive is that, what we're trying to teach you in some respects, well, there's 2 or 3 things we're trying to teach you, of course, and one we return to a lot is to try and break down the barrier between the sacred and the secular, that all life is sacred, and that's something that should be an animating principle of our lives going forward, and that should affect how we go to work every day. But this is another thing we are trying to get told to you as principles. Like I often say, we're not trying to teach you techniques. We're trying to teach you principles by which that you can take into your work. And one of those principles is that love is at the center of our Christian existence and should be the motivating and animating factor in everything that we do. So if you look, I was in a job where occasionally I had to fire people. We had to restructure a business. I've had to tell folks that their job is ending, and you have to do that. You have to do that from a place of love. And of course, that's an easy thing to say and a much more difficult thing to do. But again, that's what this stuff means. That it's possible that I could just simply harden my heart so that action did not cost me anything. It just simply was all the pain was kind of passed on.
Remove yourself, keep it at a distance.
Yeah.
This is just business kind of thing.
So that's not the attitude of the Christian. If love is the sum of all virtues, love should be in the middle of that transaction as well. And believe me, that's not an easy thing to do, but it is what we are called to do. And eventually, if you get to some position of leadership or responsibility, how you structure those kinds of decisions will define you and define your leadership and define also the culture that you're creating as a business leader. I just think, it's hard the challenge here is to see love not as something that is simply an emotion that comes and goes, that can be lifted and it can be laying down, but something that's this animating core sense of how is my orientation towards the world. That's what we're trying to get you to see in this short piece.
And I think it's really good that you bring up these examples and that you mentioned that it's evidence of, again, how Christians themselves have this sacred secular divide, because there are a few sermons on Sunday or Bible studies that aren't going to emphasize love on Sunday, but then when you go into your office on Monday or your work on Monday, what are you supposed to do? I was at a conference this past week, and in a similar course as the Faith Work Intensive that we have at TrueWorks, a student was given a task to find the brokenness in their work. And this was someone who was in a managing position, small management. He had like 10 or 15 people on his team. And he was trying to find the brokenness and where the gospel could transform that brokenness in his own job. Well, he didn't feel confident of, say, verbally, explicitly sharing the gospel with every person on his team, or maybe he wasn't even permitted to. But what he said that he could do, and that the Lord had placed on his heart, is to just tell the members on his team in a serious way, I love you, verbally. And he had, like you had described, he had prayed for his team without probably them knowing, but he just wanted to then now have it come fruits into action, tell them verbally. And in one instance, he was sharing with me that one of his team members just broke down in a kind of a one-on-one assessment and started crying. And this is like a grown man. He was and just so appreciative because these were not empty words by the boss. That they could clearly see it, but now giving reality, verbal reality to what he had done was very impactful. And so this doesn't have to be like, it can be as quote unquote small as simply letting someone know how meaningful and how important they are, or it could be restructuring aspects of your business as well.
Yeah. I think that will do it for today.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us for the TrueWorks podcast, talking about love and the sum of all virtue. If you want to hear more episodes of the TrueWorks podcast, you can find us on anywhere that podcasts can be found, or on our website at trueworkshouston.org. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.